Welcome to worship at Middleton Community Church, where we say that no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Good morning, and thank you to our celebration singers this morning. That was really beautiful. This is the fourth and final week of our season of creation. These 4 weeks we have been reading both our scriptures and from other texts, and reading nature, reading the natural world around us to learn more about God and ourselves and the love that God has for us. So in our first week, remember, what did we start with? We started with rivers, and then we went to mountains, and last week, trees. And today, we end in the skies by reading the clouds that are around us. So welcome here, welcome as we worship together.
We are invited to listen and reflect upon 4 short readings today. The first is from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 to 2. So then, with endurance, let's also run the race that is laid out in front of us. Since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let's throw off any extra baggage, get rid of the sin that trips us up, and fix our eyes on Jesus, faith's pioneer and perfecter. He endured the cross, ignoring the shame, for the sake of the joy that was laid out in front of him, and sat down at the right side of God's throne. Second reading is from Ovid, Metamorphosis. All other creatures looked down toward the earth, but humanity was given a face, so that they might turn their eyes towards the stars and gaze up upon the sky. Third reading is from Psalms, chapter 19, verses 1 through 4. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. This is by Daniel Cooper-Ryder. Speak to the earth, and it will teach you, page 165. The biblical understanding is akin to the Pueblo in the desert regions of the North American Southwest, who turn to a class of supernatural beings that they call the cloud people. The cloud people are the spirits of the ancestors who lived good lives on earth, and so they were blessed by the gods to be embodied as clouds in the afterlife. It is said that they form into clouds with the moisture from the last breath that they take, like the visible mini clouds we breathe out in the winter as the warm moisture within us cools and condenses and lingers for a moment in the cold, dry air. Theirs is a harsh desert landscape, not unlike that in the Bible, in which clouds can be the difference between famine and death and harvest and life. The Pueblo believe that if they pay proper respect to the dead, then their ancestors in the cloud people, will be kind and bring shade and moisture, rain and life. Various voices, different methods. God is still speaking.
It's
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So we're on to clouds. Clouds are a little harder to hang on to than trees and rivers that we can put our hands in and mountains that we can climb. When I was in high school, I remember one day painting I was in the attic bedroom, and I painted all the walls a light blue. I feel like a lot of teenagers go through this phase, right? I painted all the walls light blue, and then my friends and I painted clouds on all of the walls so that I could stare up at the sky while I was laying in my bed. I was very close then, being an attic bedroom. But I would also sneak out the back window of my room pretty often, not to leave the house, right? But just to sneak out. I'd take blankets out, and there was like a lower level of the house just outside of my window, and I would climb onto the roof on really nice nights and be able to stare up at the sky. All other creatures look down toward the earth, we heard. But humanity was given a face so that they might turn their eyes toward the stars and their gaze upon the sky. We hear in our text today from the 19th Psalm, the heavens are telling the glory of God, and the sky proclaims the work of God's hands. Right, this takes us back to the first week that we were talking about the way that God speaks to us through nature and through the world, right? That many of the early reformers talked about two ways to learn about God. And not even before the reformers, right? Augustine used to talk about this, that we learn about God, that we read Scripture, but that we also read the world around us. We read the natural world in a way that teaches us something about God. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the sky proclaims the work of God's hands. In many other ancient traditions, we hear about stars, right, representing ancestors. And we look out in the sky, I'm thinking Lion King, right? And that the ancestors shine down on us. But actually, if we look to our scripture, the stars aren't ancestors in our scriptures, are they? Do we remember? We heard this a couple weeks ago. What are the stars? Anybody? descendants, right? Stars represent the descendants, the future hope that we have throughout our scriptures. We talk about stars as descendants. And instead, in our scriptures, when we think about our ancestors, more often we hear about them as clouds in the sky, great clouds that surround us, that hold us in. And that relates to what we heard from Daniel this morning in his book about the cloud people of the Pueblo. This idea that our ancestors, the saints of our lives, leave this place and that their last breath joins the clouds to look over us and surround us. Now, I know that in climates such as ours, we don't often think about clouds as life-giving, do we? Right? Especially on days like today when the gray has kind of set in and we know that it's probably not going to leave for some time, that it is going to bring with it shortened days and colder temperatures and very long nights. And we know that in a few months we will give anything to make those clouds go away, to have sun. But when we think about the Pueblo people in the desert who don't often get clouds, we are reminded that clouds too are life-giving for us, right? That the world survives because we have this way of the world watering itself, right? Of moving water and feeding the rivers and the oceans and watering the ground and allowing things to grow. There is, we often call the planet the blue planet, right? When we look at the globe. But in reality, when we look at photos of the Earth from outer space, it's not blue, is it? 3/4 of the world most of the time is covered in clouds. The world is held by clouds. So we come today to talk about clouds, and specifically to learn from clouds, but I want to hang on to this idea of the great cloud of witnesses. We get this language, the cloud of witnesses, from the letter to the Hebrews. And the writer of this letter, writing to the church in Hebrews in the 11th chapter, just before what we read today, gives this long litany of a list of saints of the faith. So he goes through and he talks from the very beginning, Abel and Enoch and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. He names them all and talks about how these were people of faith, people who lived their lives in faith even when they didn't see the promises of their faith fully realized, right? People who continued to say. Now, of course, this writer only talked about the men. So I would add to the list, Sarah and Hagar and Rachel, Esther and Rebecca. I would talk about the people in our New Testament scriptures, like Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene, and that other Mary and her sister Martha. And I'd talk about Lydia and Junia and Elizabeth, and the unnamed Samaritan women, and many other unnamed women who lived out their faith, even when the promises of that faith, right? Promises of freedom and love and having enough were not fully realized in their lifetime, right? So that's what the 11th chapter of Hebrews talks about. It gives this full list of saints who have gone before. And then the 12th chapter opens up, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who is for the sake of the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, disregarded its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us run the race with perseverance. It's thought that This language comes out of the culture of Roman games, right? When we think of running races, athletes and athletics and racers, right? You can run on your own, but there is something added, right? When there is a great crowd that is witnessing what you are doing, right? That for the athlete, the endeavor itself is one thing, but that they need the crowd as much as the crowd needs them, that they're supported by those who gather and observe and cheer on. And so the writer talks about our ancestors, those who have given us this faith, as the people who still surround us and cheer us on, those who weren't able to realize the hope that God offers, cheering us on as we too join in working for that hope and living into that hope as people of faith. So I asked many of you, I sent out an email and we talked last week. If you didn't do this, no worries. We will all join in this in a little bit, and we have other ways to do that. I asked many of you to bring artifacts or pictures or whatever you might have of the saints in your life. And we don't talk a lot about saints in Protestant churches, right? It's not something that we hold central to our practice of faith. And so I offered a definition of a saint in this context as somebody who taught you about God's love while they were living, but who has since died, right? Somebody who taught you something about what it means to love and live in this world. But I read this week a better definition of a saint is somebody who lets the light through. And I really liked that definition, and I thought it fit with clouds as well, right? Somebody who lets the light show. And often clouds are what make light so interesting in the sky, right? That make sunrises and sunsets perpetually beautiful whenever we look at them. So I've got a lot of saints in my life, and I want to share some of them with you. So I mentioned my grandma Lorraine, but my two grandmothers remain the most mighty saints in my life, though neither was particularly faithful. They had faith, but they weren't faithful churchgoers by any means. My grandma Lorraine would literally give you the shirt off her back, and asked for nothing in return. She often did, right? She gave away so much of what she had. Just weeks after I was ordained, my grandmother called me to her house and asked me to come over as she had baked cookies. And we shared a cookie and a cup of hot tea. And in our conversation, we're talking, and finally she got really quiet and she said, "Well, I have a really important question to ask you." And I said, "Yeah." Now, she never wanted to put anybody out, right? She'd give you what she had, but she would never want to take from anybody else. And she said, "I know you're really, really busy. I know you're really busy, and you've got a lot to do now that you're pastoring your own church. But if you're available, I'd really love it if you would lead my funeral. But only if you're available. I don't want to put you out." And I laughed at her. And yeah. So my grandma Mona, my other grandma, she walked that line between sin and saint very carefully her whole life. So she knew something about grace in a way that people who live on the saint side of that life don't understand. And because she knew something about grace, she taught me about tables and the grace that we come to know here. She taught me that there's always room for another person there. I don't know how often, every meal that I had at her home, every holiday, there were extra seats set, and there were people who were invited who she met at the grocery store that week who didn't have plans for Thanksgiving, or people that she came to know who didn't have intact family relationships that might need a place to eat and to be. So I hold my grandmothers at the top of my list of saints, and I did, in fact, lead both of their funerals as requested. But I've met a lot of other saints in my life, and part of that is the joy of the work that I do, is that I get to know saints. So Lisa was a saint. She was one of the early saints in my ministry at work. And Lisa was a member of my very first church in Platteville, and my very first week working there, she called me one day. She was a mother in her 40s. She had 2 young kids. She called me, and she introduced herself. She said, "I'm Lisa. I'm one of your parishioners, and I really think you need to come see me." And I said, "Okay." So I went to her house, and she told me that about the cancer that she had been battling in her life for 20 years at that point, and that it would probably kill her, and probably sometime while I was her pastor. And she looked at me knowing that I was, I don't know how old I was, 26, right out of seminary. And she looked at me with compassion, and she told me her whole journey. She told me about everything that had led her to that point. She told me about her family. She told me what she wanted in her final days. And then she looked at me and she said, "I only need one thing from you." I'm ready, to take notes. She said, "I need you to pray for miracles." She lived with faith until her very last day. And that's what we did together. We prayed for miracles. Nell, on the other hand, was 87 when I met her. Nell was a faithful woman. Every week, she lived kind of downtown Platteville. She would take her walker out the front door of her house after baking cookies in a big Tupperware container, much like my grandmother did. And she would walk 4 or 5 blocks to the boys' home in town. There was a home, an Orion house home actually in Platteville that housed a number of kids in the foster care system. And every week she would show up there with a giant bin of chocolate chip cookies because she's growing boys need cookies. And that's what she said. She also showed up to church in the time she was still able to come to church when I was there. She would walk to church from her house. And that was a little farther. It was about a mile from her house, and she would walk with her walker. And she'd show up before I did most Sundays. She'd often be waiting for me there to unlock the door so that she could come in and wait. Fred and I disagreed about everything. Fred was lovely man. He was a member of the small church that I served out in the country. When I started there were 12 active members, right? And Fred and I disagreed about everything that matters, or that other people say that matters, except that we both loved Jesus, and we both loved the church. We both loved that church in particular. When I first started at the church, their organist got to a point where she couldn't play anymore, so she had just retired, and it left them without an organist. And what does a church of 12 people do when they have had a volunteer organist for 60 years, right? You don't just replace them. It's impossible. And they didn't have any money, really, to be paying somebody to come in. And so they had transitioned right before I started to playing recordings of hymns on CDs. And they had a big, those old stereos with the 4 changing CD sets in the top. And they had a set of the New Century Hymnal CD recordings of organists playing the CDs. And it came in a big box. It was a set, I think it's 50 different discs with songs on it. And when I started there, his job was to go through the discs and to find the ones that we would need to sing that Sunday, and then he would put them in there, and then he would sit up there, and when we would get to a song, he'd get to the right disc and to the right number and play the recording so that we could all sing, because music was really important to him in his life. His wife died about 5 years into my tenure there, and I was never quite sure that they liked me very much. Like I said, we disagreed a lot. They knew I was really different politically and probably theologically than they were. And when his wife died, I was there at the hospital, and then we had the funeral, and we were at the funeral, and all their family is there, and Fred took my hand as soon as I came in, and he started walking me around to every person in the room saying, "This is my pastor. I really want you to meet my pastor. Isn't she great?" Fred knew how to show love across lines and borders and age. in a really beautiful way until the day that he died. He was like that. Who else do I have on my list? Not all saints I've met. Rachel Held Evans is another saint in my life. I think many of you might know who she is. She was a writer, a columnist. She wrote several books in her life. She grew up in a more conservative church in an evangelical church, and as an adult, deconstructed that over a series of years and became a really powerful voice for people who were seeking a faith life that was rich and that was full of story and love, but that was also open, right? One that had really wide tables. And she wrote about that for years. She once wrote, "This is what the kingdom of God is like. A bunch of outcasts and oddballs gathered at a table not because they are rich or worthy or good, but because they are hungry, because they said yes, and there's always room for more." When Rachel died a few years ago, she was halfway through a book. Her light was peeking out behind that cloud, and her friends were able to pick that up and to finish and publish that book, and it's been really powerful in the world today. I've met a lot of saints. I've met saints here, too. I know I haven't been here that long. Just this last month, I sat with someone who many of you have heard about now. Her name was Roxanne, and she was not a churchgoer. She worshiped with us online the last few weeks of her life. And she had spent most of her life either homeless or in foster care as a child. And when she was dying, she was really worried that the world was going to forget about her when she died, that she wasn't going to have a place that people could visit, that her family wasn't going to have money for a funeral, all of that. And so we'll be holding her funeral here in a couple of weeks. And she taught me a lot about love and compassion and honesty about the world that we live in, even and especially as we're facing the end. And a lot of you know Ron. Ron is a saint in our lives. Ron spent years tending the meadow that's outside, right? Planting and weeding and making it grow and making it beautiful for so many people. And when we have Roxanne's funeral in a few weeks, we're going to be able to bury her ashes in that meadow, right? So that she has a beautiful and memorable place to rest. That's the thing about the saints in our lives. What they do here lasts long into the future. And a reminder, what we do here lasts. And it matters. The last saint I want to mention, her name was Ruth. She was the organist at my church growing up. And she was really quiet. I don't think I had a lot of conversations with her when I first met her. But when I was an older teenager, I waitressed at the Country Kitchen in Columbus. It's one of my first jobs. And she used to come in every Wednesday night after choir practice. After choir rehearsal, she would come to the Country Kitchen, and she would sit at the counter, and she would get a piece of pie and a cup of decaf coffee. And we were often really slow by that point. And so I would sit, and she would ask about my life, and was genuinely interested in the going-ons of my 15-year-old drama, right? And she taught me about listening. She taught me what it meant to be a part of a church that's intergenerational, a part of a church where we come together and we genuinely care about one another, even when we don't know all the details, even when we're not in each other's lives outside of this place, that you can count on that relationship and that connection. So I mentioned in the emails that I sent this week and in worship last week that we're coming up on kind of some holy days on our calendar. All Hallows Eve, right? We've got Halloween coming up on Tuesday, and then All Saints' Day is often marked on November 1st, followed by Day of the Dead would be November 2nd. So often these 3 days together are called All Hallows Tide, and especially in Celtic spirituality circles, this is considered what's called a thin space. We heard of a thin space before, some of us? right? It's a time or a place where the veil that exists between us in the physical realm and the spiritual realm or the beyond is lifted. And everything is a little closer, right? That which we can't touch is a little bit closer. That which we can't hold is a little more tangible. And so I invited us to mark this time by naming the saints in our lives, by naming those who have taught us about God's love in our lives. And we're going to do that now. So we're going to enter into a time of prayer. And we'll take a few minutes to do this, however much time you need. And if you brought something to add to our table today, you can bring that up yourself. You can bring it up and you can put it on the table. Or if you would like an usher or myself to bring it up, just kind of wave us down and we can bring it up for you. If you didn't bring anything, you can come up and there are clouds here that you can write a name on or something that represents the person you're thinking about on and leave it on the table. There's plenty here. The ushers also have more clouds, so if you want to stay in your seat and do that, they can bring that to you with markers and you can write on that and they'll bring them forward. If you have prayer slips at the same time, now would be a good time to give them to the ushers. So let's enter a time of prayer as we are gathered here truly under a great cloud of witnesses. God of generations, when we set our hands to labor, thinking we work alone, remind us that we carry on our lips the words of prophets, in our veins the blood of martyrs, in our eyes the mystic's visions, in our hands the strength of thousands. Amen. Some quick announcements. First, can I see the next? I need to. An invitation to Adult Sunday School. Today, our Faith Formation Director, Emily Kaditz, will be leading Adult Sunday School after worship, Gender and Sexuality 101. A lot around here, but for those who need to think about the expansion of how we talk about gender and sexuality, you're invited to the gathering room after worship today. Grab your coffee and something to eat and head on down. Coffee and Conversation starts a new book this week, How Minds Change, David McRaney. It's also the UW Big Read, so there's hopefully a lot of copies out there. You can find it. They'll be discussing the intro through chapter 2 this first week, 8 a.m. in the gathering room. On November 2nd, or November 4th, 8 to noon, the Buildings and Grounds team will be doing a cleanup, preparing for winter, clearing out the flower beds, all of that. If you can enjoy a morning outside, please come, bring gloves and tools if you have them, though you don't have to. And then finally, I think I'm inviting Laura Crow up to say a brief word from the Board of Membership and Fellowship about our stewardship campaign this year, The Next Faithful Step. Sorry to make you cry right before.
Yeah, right? Totally unfair to make me cry. Okay, here we go. Why I give, why I serve, and what I'm excited about. What great questions. I give because church, this amazing volunteer gathering of people from diverse backgrounds with all kinds of stories across generations for no real commercial purpose, is such a countercultural idea that it fascinates me. It inspires me, and at times it can actually frighten me a little bit. So giving is an investment in the kind of community building and practice that I believe our world needs. I give because I'm caught up in this Jesus story. Dang it. The story of radical welcome and inclusion, of unqualified love, of death and resurrection. In it, I find hope, purpose, and resilience for living today. I give because while real relationships can be messy and complicated, the church aspires to a way of being with one another that is centered on grace, reconciliation, and restorative justice. We don't always get there, but we aspire. And for all the times that I have felt like not giving because I'm disappointed or frustrated or anger or hurt, because church is very real people in a very human institution. Myself, chief among those, every time God has met me where I'm at with a word or a person or an experience that draws me deeper. One of those people, he's not a saint because he's still living. His name is Phil, and he was a co-worker of mine when I worked for Monsanto in St. Louis. And I've told stories before about how Phil taught me the difference between knowing God loved me up here and knowing God loved me in here. But Phil, I think most importantly, challenged me to make and ask harder questions and better questions about what church was and who I was as a follower. I remember a conversation he and I had, and he was talking about the ways that he was involved in his church and the study groups and the things that they did together. And I said, well, we don't do that. And he just looked at me like with total sadness in his eyes. He goes, I'm so sorry. So for the last 20 plus years, I've tried to do what I can to make this place offer those things. I give because the church has provided caring adults for my children. Many of these relationships continue to flourish into their adulthood, and I have to say, because of you, they have a village. Being a part of this community has made me a better person, a better partner, a better parent, a better community member. You have helped me grow in each season of my life. And I'm not done yet. So why do I serve on the board of membership and fellowship? Because it's fun. And I'm not going to lie to you, I am far too old and far too cynical to spend a whole lot of my volunteer time doing anything that doesn't benefit me in some way. The work I do helps me grow, or it helps me create the kind of community I want to live in, and I want to leave for the generations that come after. And contrary to that little finger play that we all learned about the church and the steeple, the church isn't about a building or a steeple, but a people. And that I am the church, and you are the church, and we are the church together. As the hymn goes, whether gathered or scattered, most of our work that God calls us to is outside these doors that Pastor Zayna reminds us each week. It is outside this doors in building a community and helping our neighbors thrive. So I serve to give back to this community who has served me so well, to pass on that gift. And I'm excited. I'm excited because this last year we have been talking about our neighbors. We have been dreaming and thinking about how we are the church in this space and in this time. I'm excited for the work of Awaken Dane, a small group of people from this congregation joining with small groups of people from other churches across Dane County to ask questions about what is God up to in our neighborhoods and how are we invited to be a part of that. I'm excited for the growing relationships with our actual neighbors at Forward Garden and Pope Farm Elementary School and the people that live around us. I'm excited about Neighbor Day and the service that we can do together. I'm excited for the ways that we can reweave the fabric of community, one relationship at a time. I'm excited to learn from the giftedness of people that God has placed as our neighbors in our midst, far beyond this faith community. I'm excited for the opportunities to look and listen for how God is still speaking to us through them. God has a lot more in store for this church and for us. I invite you to join me in taking that next faithful step. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who has pledged so far to our ministry in the year ahead. Thank you to everyone who continues to give faithfully to Middleton Community Church. You can do that at middletonucc.org and find the yellow Give button. Friends, let us stand and sing together, Called by Earth and Sky. And now, my friends, I do invite you to turn one more time as you are able toward these doors that I remind you are not an exit, but an entrance into a week of service, a week of creating lives that let light shine through, light that doesn't just last in the here and the now, but long into the generations. As you go from this place, may God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious unto you, and may God look upon you with kindness and give you peace today and every day. Amen.